Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. No quarantine requirement for Indian travellers fully vaccinated with Covishield or another UK approved to the UK vaccine from 11th of October. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar underlines centrality of ASEAN and importance of India-ASEAN relations to the Indo-Pacific. WHO approves first vaccine against malaria for use in children in sub-Saharan Africa. Top diplomats from China and the US hold talks in Switzerland among heightened tensions. At least 20 people killed and 300 others injured in an earthquake in Pakistan. Novelist Abdul Razak Gurnah receives the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. And in women's cricket, first T20 match between India and Australia abandoned due to rain at Carrara Oval in Queensland. As the nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact National Helpline number 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. No quarantine will be required for Indian travellers to the UK fully vaccinated with Covishield or any other UK-approved vaccine from 11th of October. UK High Commissioner to India, Alex Ellis, took to Twitter to make the announcement. He thanked the Indian government for close cooperation over last month. Meanwhile, India will begin granting fresh tourist visas to foreigners coming to India through chartered flights with effect from October the 15th. The Ministry of Home Affairs in a statement said that foreign tourists travelling to India by flights other than chartered aircraft would be able to do so with effect from November the 15th. The statement added that all COVID-19 protocols and norms notified by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare are to be adhered to by foreign tourists, carriers bringing them into India and other stakeholders at landing stations. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all visas granted to foreigners were suspended last year. Various other restrictions were also imposed on international travel by the central government to arrest the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. After considering the evolving COVID-19 situation, foreigners were later on allowed to avail any kind of Indian visa other than tourist visa for entry and stay in India.
India will begin granting fresh tourist visas to foreigners coming to India through chartered flights with effect from October the 15th. The Ministry of Home Affairs in a statement said that foreign tourists travelling to India by flights other than chartered aircraft would be able to do so with effect from November the 15th. External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, on Thursday said India's ties with the ASEAN are rooted in history, geography and culture. Speaking at the inaugural session of the India-ASEAN Business Summit, Dr. Jaishankar said there is no doubt that the ASEAN is one of the major hubs for India's global economic engagement. On the Indo-Pacific, the minister said that the centrality of ASEAN to the Indo-Pacific and the importance of India-ASEAN relations are self-evident. He said the COVID pandemic has brought 4 areas into sharp focus for international business cooperation. These are resilient and reliable supply chains, health security, digital for development, and green and sustainable recovery. He said that India has succeeded in developing the world's first DNA vaccine for COVID-19. Another mRNA vaccine is in the final stages, as also a nasal vaccine. The minister added that global collaborations have enabled India to emerge as a major vaccine production center for the world. Meanwhile, spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry, Mr. Arindam Bagchi, in a press briefing on Thursday, spoke about the importance of the Indo-Pacific in light of U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman's visit, which concluded on Wednesday.
Look, I think there is a clear understanding of how we look at the region, how Indo-Pacific is a format that is now well established, be it in the American system or in other countries. You've seen the European Union looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy. You're seeing countries as far out as Latin America talking about Indo-Pacific. I think that's a term that's come to stay, and it encompasses perspective that we share.
Top diplomats from China and the US held talks in Switzerland amid heightened tensions between the two countries over a range of issues. China said that talks with the US were constructive as its top diplomat and China's foreign policy in charge, Yang Jiechi, met with US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Wednesday in Zurich. As per a Chinese Foreign Ministry statement on Thursday, Yang highlighted the importance of positive gestures by Washington in improving the atmosphere and the two sides agreeing to a virtual summit between their presidents near the end of this year. Our Beijing correspondent reports that this is the second time in the Biden administration that senior officials of both the countries met. 7 months after their previous meeting in March in Anchorage, Alaska was marred by confrontations on various counts. The Chinese statement said that Yang and Sullivan had shared comprehensive, frank and in-depth exchanges, and that the meeting had been constructive and conducive to enhancing mutual understanding. 7 months earlier in Alaska, Yang had lashed out at the US saying it was not entitled to talk to China from a position of strength. A statement released by China after that meeting expressed Beijing's anger with US criticism of its governance system and other areas such as its handling of Hong Kong. During 6 hours of talks in Zurich, differences over a wide range of issues were expressed, but both sides vowed to maintain communication. The Chinese statement said that the talks covered the issues of Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet, human rights and maritime disputes. Tensions have risen over Taiwan in the past week, with 56 military planes entering its air defense identification zone on Monday, the largest number yet in a single day. Yang was quoted as saying that Beijing opposed seeing China-US relations as competition, while US said the meeting was intended to responsibly manage the competition between the two sides.
In a historic move, the World Health Organization, WHO, has endorsed the first anti-malarial vaccine. WHO said it is recommending the widespread use of malaria vaccine among children in sub-Saharan Africa and in other regions with moderate to high Plasmodium falciparum malaria transmission. A report.
The RTSS malaria vaccine, known by its brand name Mosquirix, was recommended based on results from an ongoing pilot program in Ghana, Kenya and Malawi that has reached more than 800,000 children since 2019. The vaccine should be provided in a schedule of 4 doses in children from 5 months of age for the reduction of malaria disease and burden. According to the WHO, malaria remains a primary cause of childhood illness and death in sub-Saharan Africa, killing far more children than the COVID virus. In a statement, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the long-awaited malaria vaccine for children is a breakthrough for science, child health and malaria control. He said using this vaccine on top of existing tools to prevent malaria could save tens of thousands of young lives each year.
I started my career as a malaria researcher, and I longed for the day that we would have an effective vaccine against this ancient and terrible disease. And today is that day, an historic day.
Malaria is a parasitic infection caused by parasites of the genus Plasmodium and transmitted by Anopheles mosquitoes. Malarial parasites have a complex life cycle and there is poor understanding of the complex immune response to malaria infection. Malaria parasites are also genetically complex, producing thousands of potential antigens. This is the reason a vaccine against the disease took so long to develop compared to the vaccines against COVID-19. However, a paper published in Nature states that the research and clinical trials to produce malaria vaccines were instrumental in facilitating a pandemic collaboration to produce COVID-19 vaccines. This is Pawan for World News, AIR.
In Pakistan, at least 20 people killed and 3 others injured in an earthquake which hit different parts of Balochistan Thursday morning. The earliest tremors were felt at 3:20 a.m. local time. The quake affected Quetta, Sibi, Hadnai, Pishin, Qila Saifullah, Chaman, Ziyarat and Zob in Balochistan. The magnitude of the quake was measured at 5.9 on the Richter scale. According to the Seismological Center, the epicenter was located near Hadnai at a depth of 15 km. According to official sources, much of the damage appeared to have affected the Hadnai district. The National Disaster Management Authority said on Twitter that rescue and relief operations are underway. Elsewhere, in Japan, a strong earthquake with a preliminary magnitude of 6.1 jolted Tokyo and surrounding areas late on Thursday. Japan's public broadcaster said that the earthquake led to the stopping of train lines and causing sporadic power cuts, but there were no reports of major damage.
External Affairs Ministry of India on Thursday said the reports of vandalism of Gurudwara in Kabul raise concerns not just for India but also across the world. Briefing media in New Delhi this evening, Ministry spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said it is very important that the international community continues to insist on fulfillment of the goals outlined in the UNSC Resolution 2593. On resumption of flights between India and Afghanistan, Mr. Bagchi said it is a complicated and sensitive issue and there are various factors that need to be taken into account. Replying to a query on recent terrorist attacks in Jammu and Kashmir, the spokesperson said India strongly condemns such attacks. He said India is worried about the cross-border terrorism and is discussing the issue at various platforms. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates around the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
On Wednesday, international credit rating agency Moody's have upgraded the outlook on India's sovereign rating to stable from negative. Upgrading the outlook, Moody's cited broadening of the economic recovery and receding financial sector risks. The agency noticed the rising vaccinations, which have reduced the risks to growth from subsequent coronavirus infections. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you an exclusive interview with the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, on Moody's ratings and beyond. The interviewer is Ms. Simran Sood.
Today we have Chief Economic Advisor Mr. K.V. Subramanian with us to discuss various aspects of Moody's upgradation of India's sovereign ratings outlook. Mr. Subramanian, Moody's Investor Service has upgraded their outlook on India's sovereign ratings from negative to stable after about 2 years. That too after 2 difficult years where the country was severely challenged by the corona outbreak. How significant is this upgrade for India and what does it say for the state of the Indian economy?
This is a very important change because typically credit rating agencies are very conservative, and unlike investors who typically stay at least with the curve or usually ahead of the curve, rating agencies usually stay behind the curve and are very conservative. So for institutions that are very conservative to then change their outlook in a positive way, I think is therefore very, very important. It reflects the consistent messaging that we have been doing even during the pandemic, that the impact on GDP growth has been primarily due to the lockdowns and the economic restrictions that had to be enforced to control the pandemic. Secondly, the fact that Moody's in their brief has mentioned that a significant determinant of their change in outlook stems from the lower risks in the financial sector and the feedback effect that it could have had on the real economy, I think is very material, because if you would recall in the 2020 economic survey, we had shown that the slowdown in economic growth pre-pandemic was primarily because of the problems in the financial sector. The fact that we entered the pandemic with injured financial sector and yet have withstood this once-in-a-century crisis, and the financial sector is now emerging stronger, even stronger compared to the pre-pandemic, I think is very, very critical. I will summarize by saying that there is still a lot more scope for the rating agencies to move away from their conservative priors and incorporate a lot of the ground realities that we are seeing.
Mr. Subramanian, will this upgrade of outlook from Moody's give a boost to government's Make in India effort to turn India into a manufacturing hub of the world and attract foreign investment at an even faster rate into the country?
Certainly, if you look at the FDI investment that has come into India over the last year and compare it to the previous crisis period, which was the global financial crisis, then India had an FDI inflow of only $8 billion. In contrast, now India has had an FDI inflow of $80 billion, so it's 10 times more. And unlike other emerging markets which have seen outflows of foreign portfolio and foreign direct investment as well, India has seen large inflows, which is clearly indicative of the immense faith that investors are placing in the India story. Now, this faith in the India story has come because of the path-breaking reforms that the government has implemented amidst the pandemic. And while all other countries have been just focused on tiding over the pandemic, India has looked to convert this crisis into an opportunity by bringing in path-breaking reforms that history will look at as seminal as the 1991 reforms itself, because the 1991 reforms were product market reforms, while these are factor market reforms, which in a democracy like ours are far more difficult. So the investment that will come in would be because of the way the India story is shaping up, given the reforms push, which has been acknowledged by the rating agencies.
So, as you very rightly said, government has displayed a targeted approach to reforms, wherein specific sectors of the economy, including the micro, small and medium enterprises, budding entrepreneurs, startups, farmers, have got specific stimulus schemes targeted to empower and support each segment. Moody's has stressed on effective implementation being the key. How strong is the monitoring mechanism of the government to ensure this aspect?
This is always the case. It's not specifically restricted to India or this set of reforms itself. Any set of reforms, the announcement is the necessary condition, implementation is the sufficient condition. And I think we should not confuse between the necessary and the sufficient conditions. Even on the sufficient conditions, the implementation itself, several of the reforms have already been implemented and are actually in the process of implementation. For instance, let me take the financial sector reforms that were announced in this year's budget. There were fourfold reforms: the privatization of public sector banks, the limit of 74% FDI in insurance sector, the creation of the bad bank, and the creation of a development financial institution. Of these, except for the necessary legislation for the privatization of public sector banks, the other three have already been implemented. And for instance, the bad bank has already been created through an ARC-AMC structure. It's basically an asset restructuring company, asset management company structure. So I think India is very much serious on implementation as well. I'll give you one more example. Take the recent retrospective taxation amendments, which put an end to the overhang that was created by the really damaging move that was brought in 2013. So again, that is an example of the government implementing and walking the talk. So I think international investors and international agencies should now wake up and observe that India is indeed walking the talk on really taking the necessary steps to boost economic growth.
So Moody's said economic recovery is picking up and broadening across sectors. For 2 straight months, we have seen the services sector show robust growth, a sector which was worst hit by the pandemic. How significant is this so that we can move on the path of a V-shaped recovery?
Very significant, because the pandemic has impacted service sectors not only in India but everywhere in the world, because these contact-sensitive service sectors intrinsically have been impacted because the pandemic requires social distancing. Now, in that context, the acceleration, not only recovery, but acceleration in the services sector is very, very critical. If you look at the reasons why this has happened, it is primarily because of the significant vaccination push. If you would recall, in the June edition of the monthly economic report that the Ministry of Finance puts out, we had set an ambitious target of 70 crore doses by the end of September and said that that was possible. Indeed, not only has that been achieved, we have done far more, 90 crore doses by September. and a large section of the population the adult population has gotten the first dose. And as we had pointed out as well, one dose together with seroprevalence gives protection equivalent to 2 doses. This is critical in the recovery of the service sector.
Mr. Subramanian, as you said, rising vaccination rates and more selective use of restrictions on economic activity as seen during the second wave have reduced the downside risks to economic growth from subsequent corona infection waves. How significant is this given that corona still keeps rearing its head and the COVID risk is still not over?
While I certainly would caution that the pandemic is not over, at the same time, we must also factor in the fact that the vaccination has proceeded significantly. India at 900 million doses now has vaccinated almost 3 times that of the United States population, which is very, very significant, almost more than double of the entire population of Europe. And as we have highlighted in our monthly economic reports, the protection that comes from even 1 dose of vaccination plus seroprevalence, which is likely to persist at least until December, because once you get the infection, you have protection for about 6 to 8 months. So by December, we are very likely to accelerate on even the 2 doses, because now, having done a lot of 1 dose, now in the subsequent months, the ramp up will be on fully vaccinated, which will really help in keeping the likelihood of a very devastating third wave low. I think across the world, the evidence is very clear that while cases do not decrease as much because of vaccination, the severity of the infection is much lower, with deaths, hospitalizations or ICU admissions, etc., significantly decreasing because of vaccination. That's a very important aspect which we must keep in mind given the progress in the vaccination and in assessing the likelihood of third wave. That said, I think till we are completely out of the pandemic, and an organization like the WHO says that we are out of the pandemic, we have to continue following all the COVID protocols.
Mr. Subramanian, talking of the fiscal position of the government, Moody's expects the economic environment to allow for a gradual reduction of the fiscal deficit over the next few years. However, they say risks from high debt burden remain. Having borne the impact of the pandemic shock, by when do you expect India's sovereign debt and fiscal deficit situation to normalize?
This is another instance, in my opinion, where the intrinsic, excessive conservatism of the rating agencies is being reflected. Our view, which is driven by very careful evidence and economic arguments, is not as conservative as that of the rating agencies. Undeniably, not only India, but every other country during the pandemic has had to do fiscal interventions, which has increased the debt to GDP ratio. But India has actually done much better than peer economies on this count. For instance, if you take the fiscal deficit numbers, and we have them available only for the central government as of now, if we take that into account, India at 9.2% for last year is much better than our peer economies, for whom the average is 10.5%. This is data from the IMF Fiscal Monitor. Second point is that, as we had shown in the economic survey this year, debt to GDP ratio really goes down significantly when the rate of growth in nominal terms is much higher than the nominal rate of interest. For India, Moody's itself projects a growth of 10%, which I can say is an understatement. We will be, closer or more than 11% in terms of nominal rate of growth going forward, and at 6% nominal rate of interest. So that differential is 5%. In other words, the nominal rate of growth is likely to be at least 5% more than the nominal rate of interest, which will bring down the debt to GDP ratio for India far faster than peer economies. Again, an aspect that must get incorporated. It is already incorporated into our assessments, but I think the rating agencies need to start seeing some of this and move away from their conservative trials.
Mr. Subramanian, thank you so much for this insightful discussion on the state of the economy in the context of upgrade of India's ratings outlook by Moody's Investors Service.
Thank you.
The 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature was awarded to the novelist Abdul Razak Gurnah. The Nobel Prize website in a statement said that the award was for Mr. Gurnah's uncompromising and compassionate penetration of the effects of colonialism and the fate of the refugee in the gulf between cultures and continents. Abdul Razak Gurna was born in 1948 and grew up on the island of Zanzibar in the Indian Ocean but arrived in England as a refugee in the end of the 1960s. Mr. Gurna is one of the few non-Europeans to have won the prestigious award. Rabindranath Tagore was the first non-European literature laureate. He was awarded the 1913 Nobel Prize in Literature for his sensitive, fresh and beautiful poetry.
Moving on to sports, in women's cricket, the first T20 match between India and Australia has been abandoned due to rain at the Carrara Oval in Queensland. Both teams were awarded a point each. India was at 131 for 4 in 15.2 overs when the play stopped. Earlier, Australia won the toss and opted to bowl. This was the first of the three-match T20 series being played after the 3 ODIs and the one-off day and night test.
And now a report from the business world.
The BSE Sensex climbed 488 points, or 0.82% to finish at 59,678. The NSE Nifty also surged 145 points, or 0.82%, to settle at 17,790. In global equity markets, Asian shares gained amid appreciation in other global stocks. Hong Kong's Hang Seng jumped 3.1% up, and South Korea's Kospi climbed 1.8%. Singapore's Straits Times and Japan's Nikkei both gained 0.5%. Trade did not take place in China's Shanghai Composite Index due to extended National Day holidays. European markets were also up in intra-day trade. Brent crude prices slipped around 1% to trade around $80 a barrel. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $80.10 per barrel. Back home, gold prices fell 50 rupees at multi-commodity exchange for December contracts. The precious metal was trading at 46,850 rupees per 10 grams. On the other hand, silver gained 490 rupees to 61,490 rupees per kilogram for December contracts when reports last came in. At the forex market, the rupee today closed with appreciation of 20 paise against the US dollar. The local currency strengthened to 74 rupees and 79 paise against the US currency. Rajesh Lake for World News, All India Radio.
Now, let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian writes, Nord Stream 2 approval may cool gas prices in Europe, says Russia. The Globe and Mail reports, Taliban set sights on Afghanistan's drug underworld. Washington Post writes, Pfizer-BioNTech ask FDA to authorize coronavirus vaccine for children aged 5 to 11. Financial Times says, IEA chief says Russia has substantial scope to boost Europe's gas supplies. Wall Street Journal writes, France to return ambassador to Australia after submarine fracas.
A quick look at the headlines once again. No quarantine requirement for Indian travellers fully vaccinated with Covishield or another UK-approved vaccine to the UK from 11th of October. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar underlines centrality of ASEAN and importance of India-ASEAN relations to the Indo-Pacific. WHO approves first vaccine against malaria for use in children in sub-Saharan Africa. Top diplomats from China and the US hold talks in Switzerland amid heightened tensions. At least 20 people killed and 300 others injured in an earthquake in Pakistan. Novelist Abdul Razak Gurna receives the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. And in women's cricket, first T20 match between India and Australia abandoned due to rain at Carrara Oval in Queensland. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Mauritius. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.